Okay, let's unpack this. Something absolutely seismic just hit the artificial intelligence landscape.
Yeah, it really did. And from a source that, well, caught almost everyone by surprise, Apple.
Exactly. Not a shiny new iPhone announcement, not a software update.
No, this was a research paper, and calling it a bombshell isn't really an exaggeration. People are genuinely buzzing about it.
And the timing. Just days before their big developer conference, WWDC, everyone's expecting huge AI news, Apple Intelligence finally arriving in force.
And instead, they dropped this research paper that seems to, well, fundamentally question the core capabilities of the very AI models everyone's so excited about. It's quite a move.
It feels classic Apple in a way, that whole subverting expectations thing. But this feels, I don't know, almost confrontational.
It does have that edge, like showing up to a party celebrating super fast cars and pulling out data showing they handled badly.
Right. And the title itself, The Illusion of Thinking. Understanding the Strengths and Limitations of Reasoning Models via the Lens of Problem Complexity.
Yeah.
Published June 7th, 2025. That's not pulling any punches.
No, illusion of thinking is pretty direct. It strongly suggests that maybe what looks like reasoning in these models is just really good mimicry.
And they didn't just theorize, they actually tested the big players, right?
Oh, yeah. They put the leading models through their paces. We're talking OpenAI's GPT-4o, Anthropic's Claude 3.7 Sonnet, Deepseek R1, some of Google's latest, the cutting edge.
And the main claim.
That these tests revealed some really fundamental limits in how these models reason, that they lack, true logical thinking power as we normally understand it.
Which is kind of surprising coming from Apple, isn't it? We usually think hardware, design, maybe privacy.
True, but they have this incredibly serious, though often quiet, machine learning research division. These folks are world-class. This isn't some half-baked critique. It's deep expertise.
Okay, that makes sense. But still, the timing. It's just impossible to ignore. WWDC is days away.
Exactly. And the narrative has been for a while now that Apple's kind of behind in the AI race. Apple Intelligence delays, Siri feeling, well, dated compared to competitors like maybe the Plexity voice assistant.
Yeah, Siri's limitations are a running joke almost. They've taken a lot of heat for not keeping up.
So for them to suddenly publish research saying, essentially, hey, maybe everyone's overstating what these AI models can actually do in terms of core reasoning, it definitely raises eyebrows.
It makes you wonder about the motive, doesn't it? Is it purely science, a genuine discovery about AI's limits?
Or is it strategic? Are they trying to move the goalpost, maybe redefine success in AI because they're lagging in the current race, make their own position look better?
Especially when you remember, wasn't their former design guru, Jony Ive, now working with OpenAI?
That's right. That's another layer of intrigue, doesn't it? Like tech world geopolitics. It feels pointed.
But, okay, setting aside the potential tragedy for a moment, the research itself is clearly significant. We need to dig into what they actually did. What tests did they run? What did they find? Because that has huge implications for anyone building with AI.
Absolutely. Let's get into the methodology, because that's actually quite clever. They didn't go for the usual AI benchmarks, math quizzes, coding challenges, things models often get specifically trained for.
Right, things they might just memorize patterns for.
Exactly. Instead, they used classic symbolic puzzle games. Their main focus was on variations of the Tower of Hanoi.
Ah, Tower of Hanoi. I remember that from somewhere. Moving disks between pegs.
That's the one. Simple rules. Move one disk at a time, never put a bigger disk on a smaller one. But the beauty of it for this research is how precisely you can control the difficulty.
How so?
Just by changing the number of disks. 1 disk, trivial. 2, a bit harder. 3, more complex. And the number of moves needed grows exponentially. It follows the formula 2 to the power of n minus 1, where n is the number of disks.
Exponentially. Okay, so it gets hard fast.
Very fast. 1 disk is 1 move. 3 disks, 7 moves. 10 disks is over 1,000 moves. 20 disks, over 1,000,000 moves. This gives them a really clean dial to turn up the complexity from super simple to incredibly difficult.
Got it. So they use this complexity dial to test the models. What do they find?
They found basically 3 distinct performance zones, which is fascinating in itself.
Okay, zone 1.
Low complexity, simple puzzles, just a few disks. And here's the first real surprise. The regular AI models, the ones not specifically billed as reasoning models, actually did better.
Wait, better. The standard models beat the fancy reasoning ones on easy stuff. That seems totally backward.
It does, right. It's like using a Formula One car for city driving. It's just over-engineered and clunky for the simple task. Maybe the extra reasoning architecture actually gets in the way when the problem is straightforward.
Huh. Okay, so that's the low zone. What about medium complexity?
That was the sweet spot for the reasoning models. As they increased the disks, maybe into the 5 to 10 disk range, models like Claude 3.7 Sonnet, GPT-4o, they started to significantly outperform the standard ones. This is where their supposed reasoning abilities seem to pay off.
Right, makes sense. That's where you'd expect them to shine.
But then came the third zone, high complexity. And this is where the illusion of thinking title really comes from.
What happened?
As they kept adding disks, pushing complexity higher, both types of models just collapsed. Performance plummeted, accuracy went towards zero.
Collapsed.
Yep.
Did they run out of time or processing power?
No, that's the crucial part. Apple specifically said they gave the models plenty of resources, plenty of time. It wasn't a resource limitation in the usual sense. They just fundamentally failed to solve the complex problems. They couldn't find the right sequence of moves.
They just gave up.
It looked like it. And the way they failed was also weird. As problems got harder, going from low to medium complexity, the reasoning model seemed to put in more internal effort, which makes sense.
Right, trying harder.
But then, past a certain point, as the problems got really hard, they started putting in less effort. Generating shorter answers, sometimes just describing the problem instead of solving it.
Like they could sense it was too hard and just decided to phone it in.
That seems to be Apple's interpretation. Like they recognized it was beyond them and switched tactics. But here's the real kicker, the finding that really fuels their argument about lacking true logic.
Okay.
In some tests, Apple didn't just give the models the puzzle, they gave them the exact algorithm to solve it. The step-by-step recursive instructions.
Wait, they gave them the cheat sheet, the literal solution method.
Yes, the perfect recipe. And even when given the explicit algorithm, the models still failed on the complex versions of the Tower of Hanoi.
Wow. Okay, that is pretty damning. If you can't follow explicit instructions for a complex task.
Exactly. That strongly suggests it's not about logical deduction or systematically following rules. Apple's take is that these models are incredibly sophisticated pattern matchers. They're amazing at recognizing and adapting patterns they saw in their training data.
So they handle problems that look like stuff they've seen before.
Right. They retrieve and tweak memorized templates. But face them with something truly novel or structurally complex that requires applying a rule systematically over many steps, something that doesn't fit a known pattern. They break, even with the instructions right there.
This is massive, especially for, software companies building products on these models.
Right.
Or for CEOs and decision makers planning their AI strategy.
It's absolutely critical information. It means you cannot just assume these LLMs have robust, human-like logical reasoning, especially not for tasks involving genuine novelty, deep complexity, or requiring systematic multi-step execution.
So that complex new feature you're planning that relies on the AI figuring out tricky multi-step logic, it might just not work reliably.
Precisely. The fluent language and impressive performance on common stuff can mask this underlying brittleness. This paper is a serious reality check.
Okay, so that's Apple's side. Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
But you said it sparked a huge debate. What are the counter-arguments? How are people pushing back?
Oh, the pushback was immediate and strong. It really has split the community, like you said, almost like a sports game with people picking sides. The biggest counter-argument, championed by folks like the Scale and Go on Twitter account, focuses on something more practical. They argue it's not necessarily a fundamental reasoning failure, it's potentially just a token limit problem.
A token limit. How does the number of words or tokens relate to solving a puzzle?
Okay, let's break it down. Remember how the moves for Tower of Hanoi grow exponentially, 2 to the n-1 moves?
Right, gets huge fast. 10 disks is over 1,000 moves, 20 disks is over 1,000,000.
Exactly. Now think about describing one move. Move disk 4 from peg A to peg B. That takes, say, around 10 tokens, give or take.
Oh.
So if you need to describe the solution for a 13-disc puzzle, that's 8,191 moves. At roughly 10 tokens per move, you're looking at around 81,910 tokens just to write out the full solution.
80,000 tokens. Sounds like a lot.
It is. Now compare that to the output limits of the models Apple tested. Deepseek R1, its limit was 64,000 tokens. Even the big ones, like Claude 3.7 Sonnet or GPT-4o Mini, their output limits are typically somewhere between 100,000 and 128,000 tokens.
I see it now. For the really complex puzzles, the answer itself is just too long for the model to physically output.
Precisely the argument. Scaling 001 and others are saying the models aren't collapsing because they got dumb or lost their reasoning ability. They're collapsing because they hit a hard physical constraint. They cannot generate the full sequence of moves once the required number of tokens exceeds their output limit.
It's like asking someone to write a book, but only giving them a single page to write on.
Or blaming a singer for not finishing a song when the microphone cuts out halfway through. The failure isn't necessarily in the ability, it's in the medium or the constraint.
That's a really strong counter. And it would explain that weird behavior too, right? The models seeming to give up.
Potentially, yes. If a model hits its token limit, what does it do? It might just stop. Or it might try to be helpful within the limit, maybe by summarizing the method instead of listing all the moves. That could look like phoning it in, but it might just be a pragmatic response to the output boundary.
So for companies building things, this is crucial too. An AI might understand how to solve a complex problem, but if the solution requires a super long, step-by-step output,
It might still fail because of this practical token limit, not because it couldn't reason through it. So you need to consider both the reasoning complexity and the potential output length.
okay, token limits, that's one major pushback.
Yeah.
What's the other main criticism of Apple's findings?
The second big one, also pushed by Scaling O1 and researchers like Richard Aragon, attacks the core premise of Apple's experiment, their very definition of puzzle difficulty.
They're saying Apple measured difficulty wrong. How?
Yeah.
Using the number of disks seems pretty logical. More disks, more moves, harder problem.
It seems logical on the surface, yes. But the argument is that Apple primarily equated difficulty with the length of the solution, that 2n1 number. They assumed more steps automatically means harder reasoning.
And the counter is?
That solution length isn't the same as reasoning complexity. Think about Tower of Hanoi again. Yes, it takes many moves, but the actual rule is very simple and recursive. Once you get the pattern, generating the moves is repetitive, almost mindless. There are no tricky choices, no planning pitfalls.
Okay, so it's long but not necessarily complex thinking.
Exactly. Contrast that with other classic puzzles, like those river crossing problems, the farmer with the fox, goose, and grain, or blocks world planning, or checker jumping puzzles.
Yeah, those feel trickier, more about planning ahead.
Precisely. They often have much shorter solutions in terms of total moves, but figuring out those moves requires more careful planning, anticipating consequences, avoiding dead ends. They're arguably harder to figure out, needing more complex reasoning, even if the final answer is shorter.
So the argument is, Apple picked a puzzle that gets long but stays conceptually simple and used length as a proxy for reasoning difficulty.
That's the core criticism. And here's where it gets really interesting. They point back to Apple's own data. Apparently, when AI models themselves were asked to rank puzzle difficulty, they rated River Crossing, Blocks World, etc. as harder than Tower of Hanoi.
Whoa. The models disagreed with Apple's difficulty metric.
Seems so. And even more telling, Apple's own performance charts in the paper apparently show the models failing on river crossing problems earlier at lower complexity by Apple's discount metric than they failed on Tower of Hanoi.
Apple called that puzzling behavior, right?
Right.
Why fail the supposedly easier puzzle first?
Yes, but the counter-argument says it's only puzzling if your difficulty metric solution length is busted. If river crossing is actually harder to reason about despite fewer steps, then the models failing it sooner makes perfect sense. Apple, they argue, used the solution length as a proxy for how hard it is to think, and that's not how reasoning works.
Okay, this is another critical point for anyone using these AIs. You can't just look at the output length or apparent simplicity. You need to understand the type of reasoning involved. Is it simple repetition or complex planning and dependency tracking?
Exactly. It requires a deeper analysis of the task's compositional depth, as some call it, how many layers of logic or planning are involved. That might be a better predictor of AI performance than just how long the answer is.
Fascinating. Okay, so we have Apple's claims of reasoning failure, countered by token limits and flawed difficulty metrics. This whole debate inevitably brings Gary Marcus into the picture.
Absolutely. You can't talk about LLM limitations without mentioning Gary Marcus. He's been a prominent critic for years, often arguing for different approaches to AI, and he weighed in immediately.
He released an article the same day, didn't he? Knockout blow for LLMs or something like that?
That's the one. Very clear where he stands. He basically framed Apple's paper as total vindication for arguments he's been making for, well, decades.
About neural networks struggling with systematicity, logic, that kind of thing.
Exactly. He pointed back to his own work from the late 90s, critiquing early neural nets on math, showing infants could out-reason them on certain tasks. He said seeing Apple's paper felt like a full-circle moment, like they were using his playbook.
And his take on AGI, artificial general intelligence, was pretty blunt.
Extremely blunt. He called the findings existentially terrifying for the AGI crowd. He sees this as hard evidence that just scaling up current LLMs, making them bigger and bigger, is not going to lead to true general intelligence. That path, he argues, is hitting a fundamental wall.
He had that striking comparison, too, about older AI.
Right. He mentioned Herb Simon solving Tower of Hanoi back in the 1950s with early symbolic AI techniques. And yet these massive, modern, billion-dollar LLMs trained on the whole internet apparently choke on 8 disks.
And the killer line.
If you can't use a billion-dollar AI system to solve a problem a first-semester CS student handles, your chances of reaching AGI seem truly remote. That's a direct hit at the hype.
For CEOs and investors banking on imminent AGI from current tech, that's a pretty sobering message.
It's a call for a major reality check on timelines and expectations. Absolutely.
Does Marcus acknowledge the counter-arguments at all? Like, humans find complex Hanoi hard, too.
He does, but he pushes back hard. His point is, yes, humans struggle. That's why we invent tools like computers and AI to overcome our limitations, not just replicate them. True AI, he argues, should combine human-like creativity with machine precision and scale, not just mimic our flaws.
Which leads him to advocate for different approaches.
Exactly. He's a big proponent of neurosymbolic AI, trying to blend the pattern-matching strengths of neural nets with the structured reasoning of symbolic systems. He thinks we need a different architecture.
Connecting back to his deep learning hitting a wall idea.
Precisely. He feels this paper confirms what he argued back in 2022, that scaling alone won't fix core problems like hallucinations, reasoning errors, planning failures. LLMs are like race cars stuck in first gear, impressive acceleration on flat ground, text generation, but fundamentally unable to climb actual hills, complex reasoning. We need a new engine design, essentially.
And he had that intriguing bit about talking to one of the Apple researchers.
Yeah, he mentioned DMing with Iman Mirzad, a co-author. According to Marcus, Mirzad confirmed they did give the models the explicit algorithm, and they still failed on complex versions. That detail adds weight to the claim that it's not just about finding the solution, but about the systematic execution, which seems to be the weak point.
Unsurprisingly, his take stirred the pot even more.
Oh, absolutely. The comment sections were, as he put it, a war zone. VCs, academics, developers, everyone jumping in. It's a major flashpoint.
Did Marcus speculate on why Apple released this right before WWDC? The timing?
He did. He suggested Tim Cook might be playing 4D chess. The idea is, by dropping this paper showing limitations in all current AI reasoning, Apple resets expectations.
Yeah.
Well, if everyone starts thinking, okay, maybe no one has cracked true AI reasoning yet, then Apple's own AI features announced at WWDC, which are likely more practical, user-focused, maybe on-device won't look behind. They can frame it as focusing on artificial useful intelligence, stuff that actually works reliably for users, aligning with their brand.
Instead of chasing flashy AGI demos that might be brittle.
Exactly. It lets them pivot from a perceived weakness, not having the most powerful reasoning AI, to a strength, building practical, reliable tools that integrate well. Given the Siri issues and delays, it could be a strategic way to shape the narrative, a sort of redemption arc.
Okay, that brings us to the really big picture. What does all this, the research, the debate, the strategies mean for companies actually using AI, for decision makers trying to navigate this?
This is where it gets really practical for our listeners. Apple's move, publishing this research right now, feels like a deliberate signal about how they see the AI landscape and their place in it. They might be consciously choosing not to compete purely on who has the most dazzling reasoning model.
Focusing instead on reliability, user experience, the classic Apple strengths.
Exactly. It just works as their brand. Unreliable AI, even if technically amazing sometimes, doesn't fit that. So they might be positioning themselves around practical AI that delivers real, consistent value.
So for a CEO, a CTO, a product lead, this whole episode is a massive reality check.
I think that's a perfect term. It highlights a potentially dangerous gap between the hype around AI capabilities, especially complex reasoning and planning, and the current, often brittle reality shown by tests like Apple's.
Meaning, if you're building software using these LLMs,
you have to be realistic about their limits. You cannot just assume they possess robust logical reasoning or planning skills beyond sophisticated pattern matching. That assumption is risky.
so designing defensively is key.
Absolutely. Assume they might fail on novel tasks, on problems with hidden complexity, or anything requiring deep, multi-step systematic logic. The counter-arguments about compositional depth are important here too. Even short tasks can be hard if they involve complex dependencies.
Does this change how companies should invest or develop AI features?
It could, and maybe it should. Instead of just plugging in the biggest, most hyped LLM and hoping for the best, maybe strategies need to diversify.
like using smaller, fine-tuned models for specific reliable tasks.
That's one option. Or exploring hybrid approaches, like neurosymbolic AI, as Marcus suggests. Building systems with strong guardrails, keeping humans in the loop for critical steps, focusing on artificial useful intelligence, solid features within known limits rather than betting the farm on the illusion of thinking for core functions.
Could pinpointing these failures actually help AI progress in the long run?
I think so. It sounds negative, but clearly identifying where and why current models fail, whether it's reasoning, token limits, compositional depth, gives researchers very specific targets. It's like mapping the edge of explored territory so you know exactly where to start building the next road.
And could influence the big labs, OpenAI, Google.
You'd hope so. If Apple's findings hold up, labs heavily invested in just scaling current architectures might need to seriously rethink if that's the only path forward. It adds fuel to the debate about needing fundamentally different architectures.
This sounds a lot like what Jan LeCun has been saying, too.
It aligns perfectly. LeCun, head of AI at Meta and a Turing laureate, has become increasingly critical of focusing only on LLMs. He advises young researchers to look beyond them.
Why?
He sees current LLMs as powerful but architecturally limited. He thinks they're hitting diminishing returns for fundamental research, becoming more about product refinement. The real frontiers, he argues, are elsewhere.
Where does he think the focus should be?
On building systems that can truly understand the physical world, that have persistent memory, that can genuinely reason and plan the very things Apple's paper suggests current models struggle with. He believes the next generation of AI will need these capabilities, requiring fundamentally different approaches.
He even mentioned emotions, didn't he? In a specific way.
Yeah, in an engineering sense. He speculated future planning systems might have internal states analogous to anticipation, positive signals for expected good outcomes, negative for bad. It underlines his view that future AI will be far more than just scaled-up text predictors.
All of this definitely casts doubt on those super optimistic AGI timelines based just on bigger LLMs.
It certainly suggests the path might be longer and perhaps require different roads than some proponents believe.
And it's worth remembering, Apple has done this before, right? Challenge the hype with research.
That's a crucial piece of context. This isn't a one-off. They published that paper back in October 2024.
The math reasoning one, GSM symbolic.
That's it, GSM symbolic, understanding the limitations of mathematical reasoning in large language models. And it showed a very similar pattern.
What did they do in that study?
They created math problems using templates with variables, changing names, numbers, context to generate thousands of unique but structurally similar grade school math problems. This tested if models learned principles or just memorized problem formats.
And the killer part was adding irrelevant information.
Exactly. They'd throw in a sentence that had nothing to do with the math, like mentioning someone bought pencils in a problem about apples, and the impact was, well, they called it devastating.
The performance drops were huge, weren't they?
Massive. GPT-4o went from 95% accuracy down to 63% just because of one irrelevant sentence. GPT-4 Preview dropped from 96% to 77%. Smaller models like GPT 3.5 Mini just crashed from 85% down to 18%.
Wow, just from a single distracting sentence, that really screams pattern matching, not understanding.
It strongly suggested the models were easily derailed by things that didn't fit the expected input pattern, unable to filter out noise logically. They also found changing only the numbers in a problem could swing accuracy by up to 15%, again hinting at memorized number patterns over principles.
So GSM symbolic and now this Tower of Hanoi paper.
They paint a consistent picture. Both show that sophisticated pattern matching, which is what these LLMs excel at, is brittle. It breaks down under systematic scrutiny, whether it's irrelevant info, subtle variations, or increasing structural complexity and novelty.
So Apple is establishing itself through research as a kind of scientific counterweight to AI reasoning hype.
It certainly looks that way. They're using rigorous methodology to push back against claims of near-human reasoning, positioning themselves differently from competitors, perhaps more focused on chasing AGI narratives. For companies trying to make sense of AI, seeing this pattern from Apple is a really important signal. Approach with caution, focus on reliability, understand the limits.
It's about pragmatism, not pessimism.
Exactly. Know what the tool can really do reliably.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this deep dive up. What are the absolute key takeaways for listeners navigating this complex AI world?
Well, the core debate remains. Is Apple right about fundamental reasoning flaws, or are the counter-arguments about token limits and difficulty metrics closer to the truth? That's still being fiercely debated.
But regardless of who wins that debate, The big message seems clear.
Absolutely. The single most important takeaway is the need for realism about what current AI can and cannot do.
These models are powerful, transformative for many things.
Like text generation, summarization, pattern recognition, no doubt. But they are not magic. They are not yet human-level reasoners with robust logic or reliable understanding, especially when faced with novelty or true complexity.
And knowing that isn't about being anti-AI, it's about using it effectively.
Precisely. Understanding the brittleness where they're likely to fail is just as important as knowing their strengths. It helps you build better, safer, more reliable systems.
So for you, listening now, if you're using these models for anything critical that truly needs logical rigor, careful handling of new situations, or filtering out noise,
You need to be cautious. Build in checks, balances, human oversight. Don't just assume fluent output equals correct reasoning, especially when the task gets tricky, novel, or long.
this whole saga, Apple's paper, the counters, the expert takes, forces a really important, timely conversation about where AI truly is today and where it needs to go,
It really does, and it leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on, doesn't it?
which is,
Given that even handing these models the exact instructions didn't guarantee success on complex, novel problems, what does that truly tell us about the nature of understanding or intelligence inside these systems compared to ours? Is it just a fundamentally different kind of process? And how should realizing that difference shape our expectations, our strategies, and frankly, our goals for what we want AI to become? Are we aiming for bigger pattern matchers or something else entirely?
a lot to think about. A huge question as this field keeps moving at lightning speed.